This was covered so widely yesterday by all the newspapers, by all the television networks, and of course, and this morning, still headline news. Farewell, Sir Bobby. This on the back of the Times. And Henry Winter, chief football writer of the Times, who's at Manchester Cathedral, said right to the very end, Sir Bobby Charlton drew a huge crowd. On the streets of Manchester, people stopped and applauded and mourned as his cortege passed. In the cathedral, a packed congregation gathered to pay their respects to Charlton, a world champion, a European champion, and a champion of countless good causes and values. But absent from that huge group of people yesterday in the Northwest, Simon, were members of the Glazer family.
Yeah.
The Glazers, the club owners, of course, still. The Glazers chose not to be represented at the funeral yesterday as a family. Simon, I put it to you this morning, was it a poor look for none of the Glazer family to be at Sir Bobby's funeral? A statement from the protest group of 1958 read, "It comes as no real surprise that no one from the Glazer family appears to have bothered paying their respects at the funeral of arguably our greatest ever player. Honour, integrity, dignity. However, it's disappointing there has been no public statement from them today or about the sad passing of Lady Cathy. Of course, Sir Alex's wife, Lady Cathy. So, what does it look like from your point of view, Simon, when you take a step back and you look at that? And I said in the introduction this morning, the Glazers not being there yesterday, were they damned if they were there? Were they damned if they weren't?
It depends whose eyes you're looking through. I mean, context is everything. First of all, were they invited? Second of all, did they consider in the rounds with the family any conversations about the side show that might come by the Glazers being there? Because this was about Bobby Charlton, and you can bet your bottom dollar that if the Glazers had been there, there would have been an alternative discussion going on, whether it were media wanting to grab a word with the Glazers or protest groups saying, how dare you have the audacity to rock up and take the benefit of association. So I do think they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. These are a group of people. I'm not a Glazers apologist, and I'm not really interested on the views of a protest group that whatever the Glazers do, whatever they did in this circumstance, this protest group would have something derogatory to say about it. If public observations, if indeed the Glazers, and who knows what they may or may not have done. And again, I'm not a Glazers apologist. So I don't think they're the most admirable of people. I think they've done a remarkable deal for the Glazers in the way that they bought Man United, and people like Martin Edwards and JP and whoever else had shares might want to look at the reasons why they allowed these people to buy their shares from them. But if they've done private conversations with Bobby Charlton's family and with Sir Alex Ferguson, why is there a necessity for the Glazers to make a public statement about private matters? So I fall in between two stools. Yeah, I understand, and I'm the first one to make the comparison about how big a club Man United are and everything they do in the public domain. So I know that the rules of engagement are different, but I do feel that there is a damned if you do, damned if you don't. If I were in that situation, what would I do? It's difficult to imagine yourself in that situation. Because it's difficult to imagine yourself in a situation where within days of being a major shareholder of Manchester United, you have to be smuggled out of a shareholder meeting in the back of a police car, because that's the level of intensity that the Glazers invoked in their reaction from Man United fans. It would be difficult for me to imagine not ever going to the games of the football club that I owned. It would be difficult for me to imagine that the only words that my father would say, the architect of the deal, was Man United is a great football club. 18 words are the words that he's ever been attributed to his involvement in Man United. All of those are difficult things to price in. And the vitriol and disdain and contempt that the United fans or significant swathes have with the Glazers is a difficult animal and a difficult thought process. So you put that into a public display of emotion about the passing of a legend, and you think to yourself, well, given all of that, maybe it is better that I pay my respects in private, and one would assume that they would have done this, rather than pay them in public.
I see where you're going with it. I mean, the club's owners themselves are said to have stayed away as they didn't want to cause a distraction, which you've touched upon, Simon. But does it not epitomise the disconnect that can happen between those at the very top and the groundswell of support?
They would never have bridged that gap. Would you? Is there an anticipation, but them going that somehow would bridge the gap between those that detest the Glazers, and those that are moderately ambivalent. You're getting a statement from an activist group, the 1958 group, that are very vociferous, very robust in their views, and it doesn't matter what the Glazers did. Besides, if the Glazers gave back Man United to the fans for free and then repaid the fans all the interest and dividends that they took, they would still vilify them. So there's no point trying to bridge this gap. That gap is unbridgeable. That gap is unresolvable.
So it didn't make any difference whatsoever. They weren't there yesterday.
Well, look, I don't think so. The only way it makes a difference is it gives people an opportunity to say something different. The only difference that we would have seen, and they'll deny it because it can't ever be proved, that if they'd have gone there, there'd have been a statement from something like this group saying, how dare the Glazers rock up in the spotlight of great emotion for somebody that represented all the best values in this football club, and they represent all the worst.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't. Now, it's interesting because it is well documented that Bobby Charlton had a decent relationship with the Glazers, that one of the first port of calls that the Glazers had was to bring him into the fold and to make him even more of an ambassadorial role than he would have had before. Now, people will say that's cynical and people will say that's lip service. And again, I'm not going to be an apologist for the Glazers, and I don't feel the necessity to have to, but the moment you don't vilify everything that they do or say, you will have the usual suspects from Manchester United fan base saying you're a Glazers apologist.
Do you agree with what Andy in Manchester has just messaged me just seconds ago? I agree that if the Glazers had turned up, they would have taken away the focus on Sir Bobby, but they have not uttered one word publicly regarding the club's greatest player. Surely that's despicable.
Well, I think that is a PR faux pas. I do think that's a disconnect, and I do think they should perhaps look at themselves. Again, it would not be greeted with any great open arms, would it? It wouldn't be greeted by anybody that particularly... There's not an audience out there that's waiting for the Glazers to speak about Bobby Charlton. There's an audience out there waiting to detract for whatever they've done. So the average person in the streets, the average Manchester United fan, not the ones that are engaged and have a very strong view about what Newton Heath became and how valuable it is to them, right? But the average Manchester United fan or the average sports fan isn't sitting there saying, oh, I wonder what the Glazers said about Bobby Charlton, because they'll be formulating their own views and there'll be plenty of other tributes. But the ones that aren't wanting to come from a spirit of engaged interest, but all they want is engaged criticism, are going to say whatever they said. But I do think it would have hurt nobody anything, whether it came from Richard Arnold. I'm assuming there must have been something from Manchester United.
Oh, yeah.
Right,
yeah,
so
sure.
But Manchester United is owned by the Glazers.
Yes.
So by Manchester United making a statement, then it is in fact the Glazers. And if the Glazers had the audacity, I can just imagine, if the Glazers had the audacity to put their name to a tribute to Bobby Charlton, their response would be, how dare you index yourself to the greatest servant of his...
Do you think?
With this group? Yes, I do. I can understand
paying the respects. They would get vilified for that.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe that they would. Now, there will be the people that are listening to this that are from that particular persuasion would say, "How dare you, you pig ignorant sod! You don't know what you're talking about. We're Man United fans, and we'd have far more decorum than that." I don't believe you would. I believe that you would, in the same way you've weaponised everything, you would weaponise this.
We'll put it out there. Are the United fans listening this morning who would have felt insulted that the Glazers may have paid respect had they chosen certain words and paid the respect to the passing of Sir Bobby Charlton? Would you have been disgusted by the very fact they've done that?
If they'd have turned up, if the Glazers had turned up, they would be the story.
Yeah.
The story would be the Glazers were there, and there would be attempts from media to do their job, which is to get access to the Glazers, and it would have been a complete diminishing of the focal point, which would have been Bobby Charlton. And people will say, no, we wouldn't. We'd have given them no time whatsoever. That's not how the media works. If you've got a Glazer in your site and scarcity is something that you've got, which is no interviews on record, any journalist worth his salt,
I agree with you,
is going to go for it.
I agree with you on that. So having heard from Simon on that, where do you stand on the fact that the Glazers were unrepresented yesterday? The family did not attend the funeral of Sir Bobby Charlton. Was it a poor look for none of the Glazer family to be represented at the funeral? Were they damned if they do and damned if they don't? You can give us a call on that. Send us a message if you prefer. 03717 223344 81089. Pat is a big Manchester United fan. Pat, good morning. What was your take on this?
Good morning, gentlemen. Yeah, to be fair, I mean, I'm not a fan of the Glazers, but I think they've done the right thing. Just for the simple reason, it would have been a circus media. Somebody would have had had a go at them without a shadow of a doubt. Because, I mean, Sir Bobby is a DNA of Manchester United. The last thing they need on a day like that is something like that happening. And who knows, they probably might have messaged Bobby's wife and family to give their condolences. But I think it was the right thing for them not to turn up.
I see, Pat. I mean, we do know the club owners are said to have stayed away as they didn't want to cause a distraction. And that's where you're going with your call, I think, Pat.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it would have been a media circus. And you can guarantee, like I said, somebody would have had a go at them.
Yeah.
So, it takes away from, what a true sportsman this bloke was. And, that's the last thing you need at that sort of occasion.
Pat, thank you for your call. I think at the end of the day, Simon, it's going through my mind that the upshot was it was probably the right decision.
Well, look, I mean, in the eyes of whoever wants to look at it, they'll make their own view up. Right? If indeed, which none of us know, the Glazers contacted the Charlton family and said, what do you think? And the Charlton family said, look, in the interests of the nature of the relationship that you have with the football club, its supporters, and the perception of you, it might be better if you stay away. That would shut everybody up, because the problem is you've got people on here suggesting that they're enraged. I'm reading one guy from David from Marlborough talking about my uneducated opinion, suggesting that he's enraged they didn't turn up. But no one has any background, because there is a distinct possibility, given the feeling towards the Glazers, that a private conversation may well have happened, and it was advised that they didn't turn up. They don't turn up to games. It's not appropriate, possibly, given the nature of the dynamic. And then all of a sudden, what do people then say? Because the problem for the Glazers is their track record is very poor in a number of fronts, and their communication methodologies over the years. I mean, you've got one interview on Man United TV with Joel Glazer, you've got one thing from Malcolm Glazer, and other than that, you've got complete and utter radio silence and a few potential broken promises in the minds of the Man United Supporters Trust, where there was a potential fans offering post the European Super League.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that their relationship with Bobby Charlton, from what I understand, was a decent relationship. And despite the fact that they probably don't have the best interest in Man United in heart, albeit the best interest of Man United actually served them well, because a successful Man United is a successful Glazer ownership, they probably took a decision based upon what was the best outcome for the actual event, which was the celebration of someone's life and the reflection and respect of someone's passing.
Yeah.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.